Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anderson McNall, and I'll be your session host today. We are joined by Chris Hemmedinger, our Director of SaaS User Engagement, and today he'll be talking about unlocking the power of Microsoft 365 with SaaS code, a programming approach for OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. And if we have any time at the end, we'll open it up for questions. If not, you can come find Chris afterwards. Since we do have a pretty packed house, feel free to grab a spot on the floor if you need to or squeeze in. But thank you guys for being here today.
Thanks, Anderson. All right, hi everybody. This is a popular topic, it always is, so I love talking about it. So here's what, just to be clear, this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about how to use SaaS code to access the content that you have in Microsoft Teams or in SharePoint or in OneDrive. If you actually have to go the other way, if you have Office applications that you want to access SaaS content from, we have a whole product for that. It's part of SaaS Viya. It's called SaaS for Microsoft 365. And that allows you to, from within Excel, for example, get to your visual analytics reports or your data and pull that into Excel. So that's a whole different topic and a whole different technology. What we're talking about here is, I've got SaaS code, I need to import or download content from my SharePoint, or I've created something in SaaS and I need to publish it to SharePoint or Teams. So if that's your situation, that's what we're covering here. So why are we even talking about this topic? In the good old days, when we all had all these applications on our desktop and all of our data was either on our desktop or on a network drive, we could just write code that would do proc import and we'd point to our Excel file and we just read it in from our C drive or our mapped network drive, and all was good. But then the cloud happened. And most of us now who are using Office, Microsoft Office-like technology are in Microsoft 365. And our data that used to be local is no longer local. It's in the cloud, hosted in a Microsoft 365 tenant. So our approach has to change. No longer can we just point to it like it's a directory. We have to use APIs to pull that stuff from SaaS or from the cloud and to push it back out. Fortunately, Microsoft publishes a robust API called the Microsoft Graph API that lets us accomplish everything we need to do. Unfortunately, it is a change in process and a learning curve for most of us who haven't done things quite that way before. During this talk, I'm hoping to clarify, demystify some of the processes that you would use to make that happen. And I've also created a set of macros that make the most common things people want to do easier. I should also say that we have a brief time together today to cover this topic. And I'm going to be kind of blasting through basically just to show you how it can be done. If you need more details, I have published extensive documentation about all of the steps on SaaS blogs. I've also published a project on GitHub, and I've also recorded several videos that show all of this in action that are available on our SaaS communities. So when you need more information, it's definitely there. For now, think of this as just kind of raising awareness. Why do we want to do this? In addition to just the basic getting the data into SaaS, it also opens the door to more integration with our Microsoft 365 systems. So many of us are now using some of the Microsoft tools like Power Automate to trigger actions and create more complex flows that where one end or the other is bookended by SaaS, or data that comes from SaaS or data that goes to SaaS. And by doing this, we can use SaaS to help populate data that then goes into a Power Automate flow. And we do that every day for our SaaS communities to onboard SaaS employees when they join the community. I pull data from our community, I figure out who the new employees are, I create an Excel file, I publish that to a SharePoint or a Teams folder, and then Power Automate takes it up from there and then sends them an automated email that's personalized to their login. So I'm using this every day myself, and the great thing about this is it opens the door to participating in this, the powerful applications that are out there in our cloud. There's another example of pulling a whole collection of Excel files from a SharePoint folder and analyzing them in batch to get information out of them. That's another thing that I do routinely. So this topic was important to me for my own productivity, and I know it's important to a lot of other users. When we're talking about using APIs from SaaS, the way that we do that is we use a special procedure called proc HTTP. It's basically, proc HTTP is like the SaaS version of curl, or command line URL, that many of you might be familiar with. It's very powerful. It lets you do just about everything that curl can do. And it's a 1-2 punch with using the proc HTTP to go and get the data from the cloud, and then almost always the response that we get from the cloud is in JSON format, and then we use the JSON live name engine to read that in as SAS data, where we're all familiar with how to work with that. So this is an example of just sort of raw using the API as it might look in a session. I will show you some macros that wrap up some of the more complex things. However, if you are really getting into this, I recommend that you spend some time learning a little bit about the Microsoft Graph APIs. Microsoft has great documentation about this. They also have an interactive tool called the Microsoft Graph Explorer that allows you to play with the APIs, and if you log in using your credentials, you can actually use the APIs on your own data. So you get familiar with these APIs and what kind of response they're going to make before you actually try to transcribe that into your SaaS process. So what does it take to transcribe it into a SaaS process? Well, in order to call these APIs from SaaS, we need a couple of things first. We need what's called a client application to be registered in your Microsoft 365 tenant. So this is something that you're going to have to partner with your IT group on, or whoever is looking after your tenant, to register an application that kind of identifies the activity that you're going to be doing here. You only have to do this once per organization. So once one person does it or a group does it, as long as everybody kind of agrees that this application is going to do these things and have these kinds of privileges, everybody can use the same application. So in our case, I have several people in SaaS who are using one application endpoint for this. But per user, we each need to get our own authorization code. This is because when we connect to the API and do these actions, we are doing them as us, as our own identity. So I can't use SAS to access data in Teams or SharePoint that I don't have privileges to. All of this access is delegated, which means it is acting on my behalf. So this is important. Every person who's going to be using this has to get their own authorization code. Luckily, this is something you only have to do once, and from that authorization code, you can turn that in and get a token. And a token is what actually is it's like your hotel key to go ahead and open the door to all of this data. And the token comes with an active token that you can use right away, but it expires in a short time. But it also comes with a refresh token, which you can then use later and always exchange it for a fresh token. And then once you have these tokens, you can use the APIs. So we'll see this in action in a minute, but the important thing to know is you only have to do one time per org for registering the application, one time per user for the authorization code, and then these bottom two items, getting a refresh token and then actually using the APIs, you can do that automated. You do not, the first two are, I guess, interactive things you need to do. The bottom two can be automated. They can run in batch. The process for registering an application, it's in the Azure portal. This is a screenshot of it. I won't get into all the details, but just know that the guidance I've provided in other documentation will basically tell you what you need to ask for. And in our organization, it's a very common request. So we actually have like a whole ticket form that's just for this. Yo, you need one of these? We're used to provisioning those. Just tell us what you want to use it for and we'll grant it for you. Once you've created that application, it comes with a unique ID that you are then going to use to basically make a special URL call to get an authorization code. And you're basically just going to paste that URL call in your browser, and then the end result of that call is going to give you a code that you can copy and paste and use one time to get your token. So this is an example of the long URL down there at the bottom that you're going to get that has that auth code in it. And then you might get one of these prompts that says, oh, this application wants to do some of these things on your behalf. Do you want to allow that? So it requires your consent. Again, you do this just once. If you get this far and you don't have IT consent yet, you might get another blocker that you'll then have to go to your IT and ask, bake them a tray of muffins or something and ask nicely. I'm sure they will help you. Once you have that auth code, I've said you can begin to use my macros to get your initial token. So you paste that token into that code into into the template that I've set up, and then call this macro that will get the access token. It makes some login API calls behind the scenes, and will get you that token. Everything that we're talking about here, once you have your setup and your token, you're going to end up with these things stored in files so that they can be used day after day or repeatable. These are credentials. These are like credentials, and you have to protect them. So best practice is to put them in folders or locations that only you can have access to, because anybody who gets a hold of them can do these actions on your behalf. So just be aware of that. I've talked a little bit about the macros. If you want to, there's a QR code that goes to the GitHub, but these, again, you can just, if you Google this topic, you're going to land up on my blog post, and links to everything are there. These macros will help you get that initial token. They will help you do the things that most people want to be able to do. List the folders that are in my Teams or SharePoint. List list the files. Download a file that I need. Upload a file that I want to publish from SAS. All right, let's take a quick look. So here I have, this is a, let me get out, I guess I get out of my presentation. All right. This is a SAS notebook that is in my in Visual Studio Code. So important. You can use any version of SAS, any modern version of SAS, SAS 9.4, SAS Viya Workbench. You could be using SAS on your desktop. It's fine. This code will work in any of those environments. There are no additional product requirements needed in order to make this work. It's all just using base SAS. I'm using the SAS notebook in VS Code because I like the sort of tutorial format that lets me do. So in my first step here, I'm going to go ahead and grab my macro code. I'm going to pull that right from GitHub. So I'm going to just run that. And it's using my local SAS server in this case. And you can see the log generated. So basically what this did is it just submitted my macro code, so I have those macros defined in my session. Then I'm going to initialize my config information. This is where my token is stored. So it's just telling these macros where my authentication token is stored so that I can make my connection to Microsoft 365. If I'm doing this for the first time, I need to generate that authorization URL to get that authorization code, and then I would turn in that code to get my first token. But I don't need to do that because I've done that. I created that token a long time ago, and I'm able to just keep using it. Now I'm gonna initialize my connection, which means take the token I have and turn it in for a new token. So you can see I had a token that expired because I just ran this a little while ago. I've just turned in a new token. My old token would have expired at 3 o'clock. My new token expires at 4:30. And then just to show you the simple API call, I'm just going to get information that Microsoft 365 has about me, and I'm going to use the JSON PP function, which is one of my favorite functions, to spit it out to the log. Oh, I ran that twice, but that's fine. And there's my information from Microsoft 365. Don't take a picture, secret. Okay, now I can begin to look at my SharePoint, my Teams SharePoint. Just to show you, I have that SharePoint up here. So you can see I've got a Teams folder, and it's got it's a site, it's got team content folder. If I come over here and I say I'm gonna want to list the libraries and list the folder items in that library for my team, and I do a little proc print, you can see it tells me what I've got. I've got that team content folder that you just saw in SharePoint, and it has all the identifying information I need for my next API calls. So basically I'm using code to drill into the next thing in that folder, and let's go ahead and explore that. And every time I do this, I'm getting back a collection of folders and files, and each of those has a unique ID. It's that unique ID, which is a long, not human legible or memorizable ID that I'm going to use for the next API call. So I have a reports subfolder in there. I'm going to drill into my reports subfolder and see what I've got. I've got a few files. So just to go back for reference in my SharePoint, I've got my reports, and then I've got those files. So this is live in SharePoint, and then this is my code that's fetching that information as we speak. Now that I have all the identifiers for those files that are in that folder, I can pick one to download. And download, in this case, it means I'm going to take that copy of an Excel file that's in SharePoint, and I'm going to move it to my SAS session, so not necessarily my PC, but my SAS session, so that I can import it. So I'm going to run this, and it will basically use the API to download that file. And then, because you saw me do this sort of discovery, and I have folder IDs, I have file IDs now. I don't need to do that discovery every single time I do this. I have these IDs, they are not going to change. For the same folder and same file, they will always be the same. So I can store those, and just, when I want to batch this up, I can just use the same IDs over and over again and skip that sort of discovery phase. Now let's import this Excel file. So this Excel file I downloaded to a local folder, and now I've imported it with proc import, and now I've showed you the first few records of it. And finally, let's go ahead and create something. So I'm going to go ahead and create a report using the data that's in this file I just downloaded. So I'm going to run some proc SQL that does some analysis, creates new columns, does a summary, then uses ODS Excel to create a new XLSX file that I'm going to then turn around and upload eventually. So right now you can see in my notebook, here's my result. This is the report I created, but in addition to this HTML view that I'm looking in the notebook, I also have an XLSX file for it. And I can take that XLSX file and send it up using the upload file macro to my report folder. So these macros are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. The upload operation is actually a little complex because it has to actually break, for especially large files, has to break the file up into a bunch of chunks and make a bunch of different API calls to push it up there in piecemeal, and then it reassembles on the other side, like a Star Trek transporter. It breaks it all up and sends it, and then it gets reassembled on the other side. If I go now to my SharePoint, and you can see, if I refresh this, you can see my sci-fi summary report updated just now, and I can prove that by going to the version history. I've done this a number of times, but every time I do, it creates another version of it, and you can see that history there is in SharePoint. I know I'm running up against the clock here, so I want to, so just to summarize, I have these macros, these helper macros in this GitHub repository that will be helpful to you. If this is intimidating to you, well, and this is the first time you've seen it, I understand. Just be assured, I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of SaaS customers out there who are successfully using this mechanism to get their work done, to get data to and from the cloud now that we have. All of our Office documents are out there in Microsoft 365. And I have a lot of resources on my blog. So if you were to Google this topic, SaaS, using SaaS with SharePoint, you're going to the top result is going to be this blog, and from this blog you can get to all the other links, the videos, Ask the Expert sessions. So it goes pretty deep and a lot slower than I was able to go today. If you have more questions about it, we might run out of time in this space, but I'm over in the SaaS communities booth in the customer engagement area over here, or you can find me wandering around or whatever. I'm happy to go deeper with you on any of this topic, or if this is something that you're really struggling with in your organization, just let me know. I'm easy to find and contact. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Thank you.